It's Wednesday night, and I am continuing a study that we were doing last Saturday morning. I normally would go to predestination, but I've got so many things to document about Halloween and Christmas season. And I really want you to get a hold of some of these things, because I've got more information on this than I can possibly give to you. More documentation. I got all kinds of books over here, and I bring a lot of them just in case some of you. I'm not going to go through. I told somebody we're going to go through 2 chapters. John, I said, we're going to go through 2 chapters of all these books I got up here tonight, and we're going to be here until 10 o'clock next Wednesday or something like that. But I just want to bring some along so I can show you some of the documentation we have on Christmas being pagan. Some of the books I have are by witches, and they're not witches spewing out witch stuff other than information about witches. One of the witches is Edane McCoy. She's one of the best historical writers on what witchcraft is. And she matches up with Madame Blavatsky, who was Hitler's mentor. Madame Blavatsky was kind of the mother of this New Age movement, and Hitler kept the secret doctrines by his bedside, and Hitler was a fire worshiper. In fact, I said this the other day, that I said this Sunday morning, that Hitler sent Himmler to Tibet to measure the Tibetan Buddhist worshippers, and they were called Svastis, S-V-A-S-T-I. And whenever you get into the Svastis, you get into the swastika, which are the swastika, which was the wheel of the year. And of course, the swastika was it was evil only in the sense that it was a fire worship symbol, but it wasn't evil like, let's go out and murder the world. It was evil in the sense it was trying to sell it was a soft sell to the ancient world. It was the worship of fire and trees. It was the Baal and the grove that Israel was involved in, and the same thing that we call the Christ Mass, Baal and grove. And most people don't realize these things. And the swastika has 2 directions that it goes, and it is the fire wheel. And when you get into study, I've got a book called The Golden Bough here. This is the 1-volume set. And I've also got a 13-volume set of The Golden Bough. Just got this recently. And I don't know if I'll get to read some out of it. But this is even more thorough when you get into the full 13 volumes. I don't know if you'd say it's more thorough. I don't even know what the word would be. Not more organized, but it just has more information than the 2 Babylons, because it's got 23 volumes. And he's got a tremendously organized way of laying this stuff out. And then when you compare what he's saying with what the 2 Babylons is saying, here it is. Now, there's a man named Ralph Woodrow. He wrote Babylon Mystery Religions, and he simply copied some of the things out of the 2 Babylons by Hislop. And his name is Ralph Woodrow, and he wrote the Mystery Babylon Religions. But he didn't tell you not to do Christmas out and out. And he has written another book trying to recant his first book, because he said he couldn't find proof. Now, you're going to have people say this. He couldn't find proof that all the things that Mr. Hislop said was true, and he was looking in libraries and in Britannicas and in Americanas. And he never mentioned that he looked into. He didn't look. I didn't see anything. He said anything McClintock and Strong or Hastings or the Golden Bough or any number of other sources. You're going to verify a lot of what Mr. Hislop says in the Hastings and the McClintock and Strong and the Schaff Herzog, and one man can't say it all. And Mr. Hislop has 265 men in his bibliography that he quotes, and some of this history goes back so far, back to 1557, 1552, 1681. Some of these books, the books that were made of the paper back then, the parchment was just very flimsy, and it would wear out in just a few years, and that's why some of these libraries, books are falling apart. You probably can't even get a lot of his stuff, but we can get Layard's Nineveh, and we can get some others that are very good. So don't pay any attention to that whenever you hear Ralph Woodrow say he couldn't find the proof of this, so he's trying to recant two Babylons. This has more information than any one book I've ever seen in my life on the fire and tree worship. So I just want to say that for the sake of those people going to try it. They'll call me and say, well, Ralph Woodrow's proved that his book is wrong. Ralph Woodrow hadn't proved nothing. Ralph Woodrow didn't even finish his own book. And he didn't really know anything. And then when you get into... And people say, what are you doing reading from a witch's book? Or how about a historical Celtic myth and legends book? They're going to verify. She verifies the same thing that McClintock Strong says, that Hastings say. So if somebody comes up and wants to know, what are you doing looking at a witch's book? She's not telling you how to be a witch in here. She's telling you the history of witchcraft and what it's all about. And her name is Edane McCoy. She's one of the most famous writers on witches in America. And then I've got a book called The Myth of Mary. This is by Caesar Vidal. And he goes into this and tells you all about the different types of Mary worship throughout all the world. And that was Milita. And it wasn't the Mary of the Bible. It was the old ancient goddesses, the tree goddesses. And the way this came into the Roman Catholic Church, you remember the beast. The beast was Babylon, Persia, Greece. Persia overthrew Babylon. Greece overthrew Persia. And then Greece dissolved into four generals when Alexander the Great died. And these four generals divided up his empire into four systems. And then Rome subjugated these generals, Lysicamus and Cassander and Ptolemy and Seleucus, and Rome subjugated them. And Rome was the beast with iron teeth. Greece was the leopard. Persia was the bear. Our Persian Mede Empire was the bear. And then Babylon was the lion. That's why it's called the beast. And that's in Daniel 7 and over there in Revelation 13. Well, the Roman Empire, there were two of the Caesars. This is how that it all got into Catholicism. This is how Halloween, Christmas, all of it got into Catholicism. That it actually came about two ways, because when Rome, the old Roman Empire, they had a fire worship system, and it was all fire and tree worship, and all the female deities were the tree. The fire deities were representatives of the sun upon the earth, and they were male. And the tree was always represented as the moon more than any other luminary in the heavens. And so, but they had a fire and tree worship system, and they had a high priest among the fire worshipers, just like we have a high priest. Everything is a duplicate of Christ and a duplicate of Christianity. And the high priest was called Pontifex Maximus. Pontifex Maximus. That's the exact title of the Pope. The supreme high priest. That's what it means. Well, two of the old ancient Caesars would not wear the robes of the Pontifex Maximus. They said that was paganism, but they were willing to accept it back into another form of religion. So what they did, they outlawed this, and this is the deadly wound of one of the heads. The head was a capital city of an empire. This is the deadly wound that was healed. Rome died and was reinstituted in the form of Roman Catholicism. And of course, Babylon was founded on let us make us a name, or self, I say name, or it was self-worship. That's all a man does, he invents him a god. And it was a reinstitution of Adam and Eve worship, which was the tree worship of the garden, and that was all that's in the world. That's all in the world. And I always like to put this down for people who hadn't heard it. All in the world. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. And that's not of God, it's of the world. And that's what Eve saw in the tree. A tree that was good for food, fulfill the lust, pleasant to the eye, fulfill the lust of her eye, and the pride of life, it would make her wise. That's what she saw. So everything was founded on this tree worship, and that's where the Christmas tree comes from. We trace it directly to today in Rome, and I've done that on a lot of the tapes. So when it was, this is the deadly wound. One of the heads was wounded to death. One of the capital cities was wounded to death, and was restored in the form of Roman Catholicism. When Roman Catholicism actually began to take hold was when Constantine brought it into the church. Now, there's three things you have to remember about Christmas. Let me erase this and put it on the board this way. So, Roman Catholicism starts branching out all over the world. You have to remember that there's several things that you have to remember. If you're going to tell something about Christmas, always try to organize it in your mind. Organize the fact that Constantine brought it into the church. Let me erase this down here, and a lot of people say, I don't know exactly how to tell people about Christmas. You get several things in your mind, but mainly, if you've got Christmas, which is also called the Saturnalia, Saturnalia, and this is not one man, this is history. It's a history lesson. This is a fact. Every one of these books has got this, and all of them. More information I can even put out. I can never give you what's in these books. There's just so much here. But they've all got all the same basic information. And some of them have things that others don't have. And you have to try to learn how to put this stuff together. Well, Christmas was the feast of Saturn. When you're going to tell people about Christmas, remember that Constantine brought it into the church. And remember to tell them that it goes back. It's the same thing as Baal in the Grove out of the Old Testament. And it comes from the fact that Babylon was the mother of harlots. Mother of all idolatry. Idolatry, of course, is the word porneia. P-O-R-N-E-I-A. Porneia. And porneia means idolatry. Idolatry means to serve what you see. Idolatria. Latria. And it means to serve, latruo, what you see or you perceive. So when you're going to tell about Christmas, to a degree get simple. Constantine brought in the church because he was losing the empire to a bunch of what I call terrorists rampaging across Europe. You had the Huns, the Vandals, the Celts, which were the Gauls. You had the just Ostrogoths. You had the Goths, which were divided into the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. But the Visigoths were they were a lot like the Celts. They were very barbaric. And when you think of Celt, you got to think of Druid. Now, Druids here, we think Druid is something modern that's been here since the last few hundred years. No. Druids have been here 3,000 years. They were here while Saul was king of Israel. That's why Israel, and some of the things that Israel did is Druidic worship. And when you think of Druids, think of Halloween. Halloween is Druidic. That's, whenever I say Druid, let me say this to you. There's four systems that you have to put together. Christmas, Mardi Gras, and Easter. And Halloween. And these are different names for fire and tree worship in different cultures. Saturnalia is in Rome, and their fire god was Mithra. Mardi Gras is in France, or the Franks. And they worshipped many different gods, but they're imitating the god Tammuz, who was resurrected in the spring after a 40-day mourning period of time. I brought this on the board Sunday morning. Now, they began this mourning on February the 8th, from February the 8th through the 15th. That's a 7-day orgy that they had, just like they had a 7-day festival from December the 24th, December 17th through 24th. And they were drunken orgies is what they were. In fact, when you're looking up in McClintock and Strong, or I believe it's Hastings, look up orgy. O-R-G-Y. It'll go into the Saturnalia, the Feast of Saturn, go into all that. Just look up orgy when you're looking that up. And then this went from December the 17th through 24th. Notice a 7-day period, just like over here. And then they mourned for they had that carnival, or that festival, carnival meaning farewell to the flesh. And they had that for 7 days. And then the last day was called Shrove Tuesday, or Fat Tuesday, because that's the last day of their party before their God died the next day on a Wednesday. And they brought that in the church, into the Catholic Church, and renamed that Ash Wednesday. And then they mourned for Tammuz for 40 days, and they brought that in the Catholic Church. And it's all Catholicism is what it is. They brought it in the Catholic Church and renamed that Lent. And then 40 days from the 15th, March 25th, that's when Ishtar went down into the underworld and brought up Tammuz and raised him from the dead. And all of these gods have a resurrection day and they have a death day. Every one of them, just like Jesus. People say, where'd that come from? It came from Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:15, I'll put enmity between the woman, between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. When Eve said, I've gotten a man from the Lord, in Genesis 4:1, when she said, I got this man from God, all she could think of was God told her, I will multiply thy conception and thy sorrow. But conception doesn't mean your coming pregnancy. It meant pregnancy. You're already pregnant. When Adam looked at you and saw you were naked and he was naked, and they'd eaten of the tree, what a naked man and a naked woman does is they partake of one another. And that's what they did, and she got pregnant that day. So God says, I'll multiply your sorrow and your conception. So when he comes out, when Cain is born, she says, I've gotten this Savior from God. He's virgin born. That's actually what she was saying. I got this man from the Lord. She didn't say I got it from Adam. She didn't know nothing about pregnancy, 9 months. She didn't know anything about ovulation. She just had been born that day. You realize that? She wasn't educated. She didn't know where it come from. She said, I got it from God because God said so. And he was talking about Adam, and she was already pregnant with Cain. And Cain was born out of wedlock. That's why he's not named in the lineage of God in the 5th chapter of Genesis. He's left out of the righteous lineage of God. Therefore, he had to be a bastard son. Bastard sons did not have any inheritance. So he wasn't, even though the last verse of the 2nd chapter says that Eve was Adam's wife. Wife was a title betrothed. They didn't have the permission from God to come together sexually yet and have children. So he had to be a bastard son. He wasn't in the lineage. Who do you think put it in Adam's mind to offer? Who do you think put it in Abel's mind to offer blood sacrifice? He just thought, well, I think I'll offer a blood sacrifice. No, he got the idea because God's the first one to offer the sacrifice to cover Adam and Eve's sins in the 3rd chapter, and Adam had to tell Abel to do that. And he had to tell Cain, and Cain was rebellious. He offered the works of his hands. And somehow, when the sons of God marry the daughters of men, here's what's wrong with Christmas, one of the main things, one of the main points. Sons of God are the lineage in Genesis, the 5th chapter, of Adam through Seth, and Cain's not listed. Seth is a substitute. His name means substitute. He's a substitute for Abel. And this is the righteous lineage that goes down to Noah, Shem, and all the way down to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, that's the righteous lineage. That's the sons of God. Sons of God. And this is the daughters of men. This is Cain's lineage in the 4th chapter. And the sons of men was an old ancient term for Gentiles. And when Paul says that the Gentiles will be fellow heirs, this is a mystery that's been hidden through the ages, that the Gentiles shall be fellow heirs with Israel, those that believe, and those that God's put belief in their heart. So when you get into the 6th chapter of Genesis, then you get to the 6th chapter and you see the sons of God married, look upon the daughters of men. That is not angels coming down from heaven. And this is what Hitler thought. Hitler was looking for the superior Aryan race. And he had heard that, I don't know why he's looking for it, because he wasn't. I mean, he's a little short, squatty guy with a goofy-looking mustache and ugly, you know. He wasn't Aryan. He didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And tall and big and strong, and that don't mean nothing anyway. But he was looking for that fallen race. And that fallen race, he brought back the Svasti thought, which the Svastis was, they had 8 festivals on that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That 8 festivals on the swastika, and those were the sun festivals. This one right here was Samhain, Samhain. And Samhain is Halloween, later on changed to All Hallows Eve, which shortened to Halloween. And the Catholics brought it into the Catholic Church and renamed it. And this was Yule down here. And you have the others, Beltane and Lugnash and so forth. And we'll get into those too. But the main 3 we're talking about, Easter up here, are Ishtar. And as I said, Ishtar, or Easter, was a German goddess that went down into the underworld. And she called up Tammuz from the dead after 40 days of mourning over Tammuz. And the Jewish women mourned over Tammuz in the 8th chapter of Ezekiel. Now, where was I? All right. Where this all came from, into the pagan world. When one of the descendants, when the sons of God looked on the daughters of men, that is not angels. I started to say Hitler was looking for that. And you're going to find this representation in all cultures of the world, that the sons of God were heavenly fallen angels coming down to intermarry in the world. You find that fairy tale with Hitler, because Hitler, Mary said to me one night years ago, she said, why don't you teach with some kind of organization? There's no organization. Organization is chaos. I can teach organization when I teach the Bible. When I teach this stuff, I have to just throw it at you and let you unravel it the best you can, because that's what I'm doing. There is no continuity to. The only continuity to it is how they took it out of Christianity and applied it to pagan worship. Well, here's where it started. In Genesis 3:15. Then Genesis 4, you got these descendants of Cain. It doesn't originate with God. Adam's lineage originates with God. And then Noah has Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And then Noah and his wife go into the ark. Shem, Ham, and Japheth have their wives. And where all this started was one of the descendants of Ham. It was his grandson, Nimrod. That's where it all started. He's the guy that started Babylon. Or Babel, which was the Babylonian system. Let us make us a name. And you have to mathematically deduce. It had to come from somewhere. When people come up to you and say, well, when you see these things about the ancient world, and you see all of these other virgin-born sons, how come you know Jesus is the true virgin born, and he's just another one of those mythical fairy tales? Has anybody heard anybody say that? This is where it comes from. It comes from the prophecy of Jesus. I'll put an enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed, and thou shalt bruise his head, and you'll bruise his heel. Christ is going to have his heel up on the head of Satan, or the Son of God will crush Satan. So that's the first prophecy of the Messiah throughout the Bible. And Eve is listening to God talk to Satan, and immediately he turns to her and says to her, I'll multiply thy seed. Here, I got something to say to you. He's talking to the serpent and Eve at the same time, backing up one right after the other, and Eve's listening. And she remembers God saying to the serpent, I'll put him between thy seed and her seed. And then she says, I've gotten a man from the Lord. And it is strange that one of the survivors of the flood, the very system, the reason it's Adam and Eve worship, Ham had to have married. This is the sons of God marrying the daughters of men. Ham was in the lineage of man. His wife was in the lineage of man. He brings her into the ark, intermarried with her, and brings this system that Eve said that was twisted. This is what happens when you listen to something without getting the confirmed understanding of it. She didn't get a confirmed understanding of it, and she was listening in, and then when God says, I'll multiply thy conception, and then she says, I've gotten a man from God. That was saying he's virgin born, isn't it? That's exactly what it's saying. She didn't know nothing about birth. Nobody had ever been born before. Nobody. First person ever born was Cain. And she thought it was some miracle of God that it came out of her because God said so. But she didn't know he was talking about the one you're going to have. He's the seed of Satan, not because Satan had an affair with Eve, because Satan whispered in Eve's ear. You couldn't say that the fathers of the Pharisees, or the mothers of the Pharisees, had a literal tryst with Satan, can you? And Jesus said, your father's the devil. Did he mean your mother had an affair with Satan? A sexual affair? Now I want to ask that bird brain out of Arkansas, because he says Satan and Eve had a sexual affair together. Does that mean when Jesus told the Pharisees in John 8, your father is the devil, that the devil came into, like Rosemary's Baby came into their mother one night, and they couldn't have been more evil? No, it means that Satan is their father because he is causing them to do his will, to comfort the flesh. Well, this is where all this comes from. Eve, you have to have someone bringing this out of the ark. The only one that could have brought it out of the ark is Ham, because it was his descendants. His descendants is the one that started spinning this tale, and he built Babel, and he built Asher, and he built Calneh, and he's the first to build cities, and he's a mighty hunter before the Lord. That word before the Lord, before means against. And he went out and slew the great bull and called himself the Herculean giant. Said he killed the bull with his hands, put the horns on his head, the tail around his waist, and tied the hooves around his feet. Several of the writers say, and therefore he was the great conqueror. So everywhere you find the horns, whether it's on the heads of the American Indian, or whether it's on the horns on the Vikings, or wherever you find those long pointed horns of the women in the European regalia, they come out with those little veils down over the horns. It's all a picture and a type. And they worship the moon because they worship the crescent moon that have the horns on it. And they said this depicted power of the man. And every one of these was called a savior, or was called a champion. Someone that's going to deliver them. So when you get into Hercules, it was nothing but Nimrod and Semiramis. And Mr. Woodrow said he couldn't find Semiramis anywhere but in the two Babylons. Have you looked in Mr. James George Fraser's Golden Bough? It's in there. A whole lot's in there. So this is where it started. And Babylon mothered it all, and it was founded on self. Let us make us a name. And the tree was founded on self in the garden. And it's fed down through here. And then it goes out here and pollutes the whole world. And this is what angered God. Now, this is where it comes from. All of this goes together. It has to. You have to come up with a mathematical deduction. The way it got to Babel, Ham didn't come up out of the clear blue sky, and it was his grandson Nimrod that started it all. When he said, let us build us a city and a tower, and let us make us a name. It'll be self. Now, when you're going to tell somebody about this, Tell them it's that Halloween is the same thing as Christmas, same as Mardi Gras, and that Israel worshiped this under the title of Baal in the Grove. Baal and Grove. Baal and Grove. And that's not always worship. I can't name all the female deities and the male deities. Baal meant the Lord, is what it meant. When they named their god, they called him the Lord. And Baal was Hercules and the Grove was Venus, and I didn't make that up either. And all the sun gods their birthday was December the 25th because, goodness, it's not even hard to understand because the sun waned down to December. And then it brightened up again back to midsummer, and they have fires. They have midsummer fires. They have the fires during Beltane, which is the midwinter fires, and then they have the fires for the Saturnalia, and they have the fires for September, and they have the summer fires the Catholics brought the summer fires. It's all in the form of fires or Baal. Remember when in the 18th chapter of 1 Kings, when Elijah faced the 450 prophets of Baal. Remember he faced them? And Baal was the fire god. And remember Elijah said, let's let the God that answers by fire, let's let him be. He could have said, instead of said, let him be God, he could have said, let him be the fire God, because Deuteronomy 4:24 says, the Lord our God is a consuming fire. What they had done is taken all the characteristics of Jehovah God and applied it to the gods and their goddesses. It's amazing, isn't it? And it's amazing that it's all in it's their imagination. And this is the wildest bunch of fairy tales I've ever heard in my life. It's a bunch of fairy tales. It's a bunch of fables. That's all it is. And men have actually taken this, brought it into our world, disguised it all, limited teaching Hercules and Venus and Tammuz and Adonis and all those gods of the ancient world, and limited to a history class in some boring high school history class, limited to some university history class, when it's alive and well, and it's just permeating all the churches of America. And people say, what's wrong with it? Well, there's a whole lot wrong with it. Now, you have to remember, in the fact that at the winter solstice, that's the longest nights of the year, December the 21st, that's the winter solstice, and the summer solstice is June the 21st, and that's the longest days of the year, so they had to have fires commemorating that, because that's what's giving all their crops, and it was all about crops. It was all about how we're going to get from October to March, April, through all this cold winter, when the sun's burning out, and they were trying to pacify the sun god and get him to come back. So they go to his father, Saturn, the father of the gods. He was Zeus in Greece. He was Saturn. He was Jupiter. These are the fathers of the gods. And they had different names, and they had sons, and they had daughters, and it's a bunch of mishmash. And he had dozens of them in every system. Wait till you get to the Celtic ones. God, wow, man, it's just unbelievable. That what they've got in there. I'm just trying to help you see. People say I make all this stuff up. Man, I'm good if I do that. I'm really the best. Got the best wild, vivid imagination. You can't even get into this Celtic myth and magic. You get all kinds of books on Celts down here just at Barnes & Noble. Down at Books A Million. And she goes into all of these. And it's so amazing. She goes into the Wheel of the Year, and y'all, I put this on the board the other day, but Mabon's up here, Lugnash, Ostera, Imbolg, Midsummer, Beltane, Yule, and Samhain. Samhain, of course, being Halloween, Christmas, and Easter up here, and then Midsummer here, and so forth. It's all about harvesting, planting, growing, and fallow. It's all about how we're going to get through the winter. Well, she goes through this, and what's amazing to me, she's talking about, in the front of this, she says, read a little bit. And anytime you read about Celts, it's about Druids, and that's about Halloween. That's where Halloween comes from. It's Druidic. I was trying to explain this to somebody the other day. Gaul is their nationality. Now the Gauls, three of the tribes settled in Galatia, or that's Gaul. where Paul's first missionary journey was. So some of those people that believed in Galatia were probably Gauls, a bunch of marauding Celts that were celebrating Druidic Halloween celebration. And then they went over here and they attacked Rome, and they went over and settled in northern France. And then they were attacking everywhere. The Celts were really a bunch, but where they really settled, and where you're going to find more history than anywhere else, they finally settled and began to flourish in England. And most of your Halloween customs go back to England. You have to trace it back through all those lines where they come from everywhere. So she's got in here, when Adam was in the garden, and God says, Adam, you can eat of this tree, all the trees of the garden, but you cannot eat of this tree over here, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And listen to, she's got a section here called the Battle of the Trees. And that's the battle of the trees was going on in Adam and Eve's mind. Should I or shouldn't I? And there was 3 things in the tree. And he says, if you are truly interested in working with the tree symbolism and energies on an in-depth basis throughout the year, she's talking about actually using witch thought or Celtic thought. Throughout the year, it might be worth your time to study the mythic poem known as The Battle of the Trees. And most of this is in this Gaelic tongue. Some of the gods, it's hard to pronounce them, like Guinevere. Guinevere and Arthur are part of that. Notice Guinevere and Arthur in England. And that's where the Celtic things are. And Merlin was a druid. And that's a part of the Halloween system. And they were all sun gods. The battle took place during a war which was fought to secure 3 things for humankind. They renamed the things, but it's still 3 things between the battle of the trees. And she says, dogs, deer, and the lapwing, all creatures considered sacred to various highly placed deities. And it is also set up a hierarchy of sacred trees from which used by the Celts and their Druids for worship. Now, what I want to tell you, and what I want to show you as I'm talking about this, proving to somebody you can find paganism outside the church, that's one thing. Everybody can find it. It's everywhere. And they're going to say we don't do it that way. Every one of them are going to say it. They're going to say we don't do Halloween that way. They had a special on Halloween the other night on History Channel. And they were trying to paint it up real pretty. Paint it pretty and make it look nice and saying, well, it's for children. The best way you can destroy a system is give it to the children and then take it away from them for yourself. Sell it as a nice, innocent thing, and then go out there. And it's like they said, well, why should the children have all the fun? We need to start having adult parties. Then the sex runs rampant. And then vandalism and all kinds of pranks are going on and very damaging. People getting killed at Halloween. They showed police officers getting killed in Halloween riots and all this kind of stuff. And people getting killed, and they do that every year. And how many people die of Christmas trees catching on fire? People say, what's wrong with Christmas? What's wrong with Halloween? They said the other night on the Halloween special, now here's one of the things wrong with Halloween. America spends $2.5 billion every year on Halloween. Candy. It's the candiest time of the year. Pumpkins, costumes, $2.5 billion. Now, and there's people starving and dying, and we're spending $2.5 billion on costumes and candy. It's insane, isn't it? It's crazy. Let me read a couple of things in here, and then I'll get on with something. But she goes through each one of these in a short, she gives you a short synopsis on each one of these holidays in this book. But then she takes this book, the Sabbats, the Sabbaths of the fire worship, and she has a chapter dedicated to each one of these holidays. And I'm going to read some on Samhain tonight. I'm going to read a little bit out of this on Samhain. But I can get to the Golden Mound, to the Celts. I want to get to this Celtic thing here. This stuff is, I'm talking to you tonight so I can show you some of this stuff. But I'll just kind of show you a few things. Of course, there's the swastika. It's about planting. And the swastika is the Big Dipper in its 4 phases. The Big Dipper, that's what it is. I mean, people don't like it, but here's the North Star directly north of the earth. And you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 stars in the Big Dipper. And the Bible says, then you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what they do is they draw a line to the, and you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You put the lines to the Big Dipper, you got a swastika, and that's the wheel of the year. And when it's over the earth, it looks kind of like, looking at it from the side, if this is the earth hanging in the air, and then you got it, if you look at it like this, it's over the earth, and they said the Queen of Heaven had to be turning it. They didn't know the earth was spinning. They thought that the earth was sitting still, and somebody had to be taking this, in order to get them from winter to spring, somebody up there had to be turning it. Stupid, isn't it? They called it the Queen of Heaven, and Milita was the Queen of Heaven that the Jews served there in Jeremiah 44, and she talks about a queen of... Now, she matches up with the Bible. Jeremiah 44 talks about it. Jeremiah says, stop serving these idol gods. And they say in Jeremiah 44, we will worship the Queen of Heaven if that's what we want. And the Queen of Heaven is the Mary of Roman Catholicism. Isn't she? Anybody that's ever been a Catholic knows that. And then you go into, let me give you a couple of these. And then she takes you to the Druids cross, which is a type of the swastika, but it's actually made out of wheat. And it's because it's about food. And then she goes into the Druids cross here, and she says Brid, Irish, Scottish, breed, also Bridget, bride, brigade, and Gerald says he remembers St. Bridget of the Roman Catholic Church. That's a famous Roman. They brought her out of Celtic Halloween. Is what they brought out of. Brought out of Halloween. Halloween is just a modern name for Samhain, an ancient word. And it goes on to say her name comes from the Old Irish brig, meaning power. That's where Britain gets their name. Her Gaulish name, Gaul. The Gauls were the Celts. The Celts were Druid worshippers. I started to tell you. I need to go ahead and put it on the board. Gauls were their nationality, Celts. Celt was like... It was their identity, like white or black, or even though they were barbarians, they were, like we have the United States, we've got blacks and whites, we've got Hispanics and blacks and white and reds and so forth. Well, this would be they would go and mix in with another society, and they were Celts by their identity. But Gaul was their nationality. And their religion was Druid. And that was where Halloween comes from. And they rampaged across Europe, and that's what Constantine was afraid he was going to lose in the empire. But let me read this. She was a great mother goddess. Oh, wait a minute, read this. Her goddess name is Brigindo, and she is probably the source of the Anglo goddess Brigantia and Britannia. We recognize some of these names. She was the great mother goddess of Ireland. At one time in history, most of Ireland was limited in praise and worship of her. She probably was one and the same with Dana, the first great mother goddess of the Irish. Brid represents the supernatural mother, fertility. See, they were all fertility gods. They would come up in the spring. In creative inspiration, she has also been worshipped as a warrioress, a protectress. That's the Roman goddess. I can't think of her name. The goddess of war. She's one of the goddesses of wars. I'm thinking of another one, but Athena was one of the goddesses of war. A healer, a guardian of children. A guardian of children. She was a demon. They were all demons. That are guardian angels. Guardian angels and demons were the same thing. A slayer of serpents, a sovereign, a goddess of fire and the sun. Still other sources say she was the goddess of agriculture, animal husbandry, medicine, crafting, and music. She was accredited with inventing the Irish mourning wail called keening when she mourned for her son Ruadan, and every one of them had a son that died that they mourned for, just like Mary mourned for Jesus. You could read all that into these things. It's nothing but a corruption of the truth. Her child by her husband's breast was killed in battle. Part of her essence is still said to reside in Bin Sadhi, the fairy spirit, and fairies were demons, whose keening can be heard at night before death. In the 5th century, her shrine at Kildare was desecrated and adopted as a holy site by Christian missionaries who turned her into the Saint Bridget. Christian missionaries, not Christian missionaries, Roman Catholic missionaries. They lashed onto her sky goddess aspect and nicknamed her the Queen of Heaven. Stuck it in there with her. All right, let me give you just a couple more of these, and then we'll get on to this other thing. I've been saying I'm going to document. I've got so many things. She's got a lot of tremendous information in here. Then she goes into Guinevere, one of the Arthur the Knights. She goes into Arthur and Guinevere and Merlin, and they were all, like she says in here, they were thinly veiled sun deities. And it's amazing. I just underlined one of the lines in here. That's all I'll read. Guinevere, her name means white shadow. Her duty is to blend the king's energy with the energy of the land. You remember that especially if you watched the movie Excalibur, they kept saying the land was the important thing. But the land is that's what the land was produced for Israel, gave crops to Israel, wasn't it? It's all about the land. I'll give you the land. It's just a corruption of truth. Let me read a couple more real short excerpts so I can just get on with this. I've got this thing marked up, Lady of the Lake. She goes into the Lady of the Lake. If you go into Hastings, they go into the Lady of the Lake. If you go into water gods in Hastings, they go into the same thing. They verify what she's saying. She verifies what they're saying. Always get some verification from both points, especially if you're going to read out of something like this. They go into the Lady of the Lake, and we got Lady of the Lake Catholic Church right over here off the interstate, don't we? Lady of the Lake was in all of their gods and goddesses, they were a mixture. Sometimes you had several of them in the same system that were the same person. Like Morgan Le Fay was the same thing as Lady of the Lake, even though in the movie they got him as two people. And Arthur's sister, Arthur pulls the sword out of the stone. Jesus is the rock. The word of God comes out of Jesus and is the sword. And Arthur's supposed to take care of the land, and he was a sun god. And I'm talking fast because I don't even have time to get to all this. I like to read this about, we talk about the sword in the churchyard stone. Morgan Le Fay. This is amazing because in myth she was the daughter of Le Fay, a glamorous Welsh sea goddess, as the half-sister of King Arthur. She possibly was once a goddess of Glastonbury Tort. Now they say some of these women, some of them were actual people in history that they renamed them, took them into... They did the same thing the Roman Catholics did. They deified them as saints among their gods. Can you see what I'm saying? They'd take a person and make them a saint among their god system. A sacred pagan site intimately associated with the Arthurian myth. And then she says, the root of her name, Moor, means sea. This is amazing. And Le Fay means fairy or demon. She was the sea fairy, the sea demon. And you move that over, you can trace this all around these other cultures, and you can end up over here at Joppa, or end up among the Philistines, and you end up with Dagon. Dagon was the fish god or the sea demon, and he was a demon, and it comes from dog, is the word fish in Hebrew. The sea demon. It's just a mishmash and it's a mess. And I wish I can't even pronounce most of the names of these gods and goddesses. There's hundreds of them in this book. Hundreds. Goodness sakes. And then I'm just kind of skipping around, giving you a few things here. She goes into the triple goddess. She is always the same moon. It was the waning moon and the crescent moon. What they did was duplicate the sun waning and waxing to to die, and wane means to build up again. So they have that system, and it's like a duplicate, or it's like an antitype of the Trinity. And she's got many antitypes of the Trinity all through here. I'd like to read this about Arthur. She says, King Arthur. He goes right along. He is Druidic. He is part of the Halloween system, the Druid system. Goddess May Queen figure, and was mortally wounded in battle by his son Modred, who's no doubt a picture of Cain throughout this. He was the son that turns against the god or the goddess. Son of Modred by Morgan Le Fay. Arthur's body was carried to Avalon to sleep, and that's going across the river to heaven, and await the time when he is needed so he can be resurrected. Therefore, he is the sacrificial God King in the purest sense. Other stories say he was changed into a raven upon his death, and Celtic folklore often sees dead figures turn into birds, and archetypal symbol of transition to the spirit world. Writing at the end of the 19th century, Celtic mythologist Sir John Rhys believed the Arthurian stories paralleled that of Fionn mac Cumhal of Irish lore, the Round Table. Oh, by the way, Hitler brought that system back and built him a round table and a castle with 12 seats in it. And he had his 12 top generals sat at that table. And that's been on the History Channel. Huh? Do you remember? We saw that. He had an exact duplicate. See, he thought these were gods come down from heaven, just like some of these stupid preachers that say this is demons, that these are fallen angels come down to heaven and marry women. Angels neither marry nor given in marriage, according to the 22nd chapter of Matthew. They can't copulate with women. They don't have the same sexual organs to bring about childbirth. That's crazy, isn't it? And by the way, the Atlantis myth is another myth on the fallen angels from heaven. This was a superior race that sunk into the Atlantic, supposedly. It's nothing but a corruption. It's nothing but a corruption of Noah and his ark. Can you see that? That's what it is. Those aren't superior race. If they want to know if there's an Atlantis out there, ask me. I'll tell them no, there's not. I mean, and then they can quit trying to find it. Sure will save them a lot of research money, wouldn't it? Donate it to us and we can build us a building. Yeah. And also parallels, and then she goes on to say, also parallels most of the old fairy tales, Gwydion, of the major Welsh folk heroes. Only Gwydion is especially absent from the Arthurian legends. Rhys also asserted that the Knights of the Round Table are barely disguised Welsh deities made acceptable to a medieval audience. They're just disguised gods. And she says one thing back here on the Wheel of the Year. She has in the back a glossary. You know what that is, don't you? I just thought that has a glossary. Wheel of the Year. A conceptualization of the eternal cycle of time. In pagan mythology, the goddess turns the wheel of the year, bringing everything to its season, taking the Big Dipper around. They thought that was what it was going to give them the seasons. They didn't know we were turning. If they had any idea what the Big Dipper was like, they'd been embarrassed, wouldn't it? Then she says, the wheel of the year is symbolized by either a wreath, a ring, a snake holding its tail in its mouth, or an 8-spoked wheel. And the 8 spokes, you got 8 spokes. That's all I'm going to read of that. I've been wanting to just give y'all some documentation. What we've been talking about is Halloween. When you're talking about the Druids, you're talking about Halloween. But it's the same thing as the Saturnalia. Halloween is less deceptive. The most dangerous of the two is Christmas. Everybody thinks that's some Christian thing. They think Halloween over here is some evil thing. No, Christmas is more evil because they've covered it up and put a veneer on top and painted it pretty. And put Jesus' name on it, yeah. And that makes it acceptable. And they've made it a thing for children while they go get drunk out here at their parties. And it's Baal and Grove worship. Constantine brought it into the church, brought the Saturnalia in the church, said he's losing the empire to all these marauding hordes, and says, I'm going to lose the empire. Well, Rome was sacked by the Celts right around 390 BC, and they were in 325. This is what's amazing. Around 390 BC, the Celts sacked Rome. And literally, like you sack a quarterback, it means to destroy, just burn it to the ground. And then they were a nation all this time. They actually became an empire around 27. They were building all this time, around 27 BC under Julius Caesar, about that time. Could have been a little bit earlier. And then in the late 5th century BC, what he had tried to keep from happening in 325 by amalgamating paganism and Christianity, what he thought he could keep and happened in the 5th century AD. The Visigoths came in there and leveled Rome. And that was the fall of the Roman. When you hear of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, it's when the Visigoths came in and just destroyed them. See, God's not going to let these guys keep going. Now, I'm going to show you how this connects. What I was saying, when you're going to talk to somebody, we can find all kinds of paganism out there in the world. I got tons of books on it, all kinds. I got stacks of it in my library. I can't even begin to tell you all of it. You can find proof. But what you got to do is document what's out here in the world. Document how it ties up in the Bible. Now, I got a book written by evidently just a Celtic historian. This is called Celtic Myth and Magic. I'm going to take it and show you how you match this up with Halloween. When you think of Halloween, everything you look up Druids. The Druids they worshipped the tree. They worshipped Baal, by the way, and they worshipped the sun, and they worshipped the serpent. So, the keys was the sun, the serpent, and they wore a serpent's egg around their neck. But you always have to look up Celts, Gauls, Druids, and many other subjects that are associated with this. Look up the Arthurian legends. Look up, y'all. How many of y'all got a McClintock and Strong? I mean, not a McClintock and Strong, but a Hastings. Hastings got more on this than anybody's got. It's got more than McClintock and Strong. Sometimes McClintock and Strong is better on certain things. The Hastings is just saturated. Look up sea gods. Look up the Arthurian legend. Look up Aryan. Look up Druids, Celts, and it'll tell you what volume it's in. If you got an index volume, it'll tell you what volume it's in. It'll tell you what page it's on and what column it's in. And when it gets to the main, if it gets to the C volume, it may go on for pages and pages sometimes. Like I said, I'm not brilliant. I just know how to pick up a book and open it and look at it and read it. That's really all you have to do. But one thing you do have to do, you just have to know what you're looking for. Look for those things when you're looking up Halloween. But let me read a couple of things to you here. I've got some things marked in here. This is in this Celtic book. It's talking about Samhain being summer's end when the sun's power waned and the strength of the gods of darkness, winter, and the underworld grew great. And then he goes on to say that it would appear probable that the Celtic state worship was what is called solar or sun. That's their state of worship is sun worship. All its chief festivals related to points in the sun's progress, the equinoxes having been considered more important than the solstices. And I said, why is it that each one of these systems have the death of their sun god at a different time? Well, Elaine McCoy explains that in her book Sabbats. And she tells you why. And it makes all kinds of sense. You can pick out either the beginning of the waning of the light, and that happens at the autumn equinox. When you get to the autumn equinox, just kind of think of this. You're coming out of summer. You're coming out of the summer solstice, June 21st, and the sun is waning. It's getting dimmer. And the time that you have an equal equinox, an equal night, or the time that you have the the sun being 12 hours in the day, 12 hours a day, and you got 12 hours of night. That's called an equinox. So the day after that, the day after the equinox, it's just a little darker. So you understand what I'm saying? That's why they said, well, the next day it's going to be darker than it was this day. And we're headed towards the darkness, so they picked out the day where it started getting dark. The Romans picked out the day where it was totally dark. And the Franks, the ones with the Mardi Gras, they picked out the day where the resurrection of their sun god came about in the spring at that equinox, at the spring equinox. See, each one of them makes sense. You can pick whichever one you want to have to be your main holiday. Among the Druids, the main holiday was what we call Halloween, or All Souls Day with the Roman Catholics, or All Hallows Eve. All Souls Day was the next day. And they had this All Hallows Eve where they honored the dead. And the dead are supposed to come back, and they started feeding the dead. Now, this is where it really gets mixed up. They left out food for the dead. The dead would come back, and when your children put on these outfits, they're supposed to be the dead coming up to the door wanting food because they fed the dead. And what gosh, how can I explain all this? They fed the dead, and it eventually evolved in eating the dead. And a ghoul is someone who eats dead, eats people, or is someone who eats dead bodies. It is gross. And so and they would call their gods were their ancestors. These were ancestors coming back. Gosh, remember this? Ancestors. Halloween. Your kids putting on their Halloween outfits are supposed to represent dead ancestors coming to get food. And it eventually, if you'll keep something corrupted long enough, it'll evolve into something else. Won't it? And they finally evolved it into eating the dead. That's a ghoul. Or that's a cannibal. Back to the priest of Baal at the Saturnalia at Christmas time. It sounds like a lecture, doesn't it? But it's still about what the Bible's about. And they left out food for Santa Claus. But boy, then you got to go into Mr. I've read this stuff till my eyes are crossing. And then you got to go into how they twisted St. Nicholas, the battle for Christmas. Mr. Nissenbaum brings out how that they restructured Santa Claus and Christmas. He was Clement Moore was a big landowner and a businessman in Manhattan, very rich, very wealthy. He was trying to restructure a system when he wrote The Night Before Christmas. He wanted to get, instead of having these people that went from door to door, and he'll go into the first Christmas that one family had in America, the first Christmas in America, back in the 1700s, and how the people would come from door to door and they'd come over their house and how they'd demand food. That's where the dead are coming back, and you're going to feed the dead or feed upon the dead. And they turned this around finally where they would feed upon the dead, and that's called the Mass, or eat the dead. And the dead was their ancestors, and the dead was their ancestors who were gods. They made their ancestors gods. So since they made their ancestors gods, they called their sacrifices down to be their gods, and then they ate of their gods. And that's, except you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you have no life in you. They've twisted into that. Notice all the perversion, just the twisting of truth. Well, they picked this. Well, I was going to tell you something. When you go into this, he tells you how that, he says it's not even stretching it to say that he wrote The Night Before Christmas to make St. Nicholas acceptable. St. Nicholas, he's got pictures of him in the mid-1800s. In 1822, he wrote the Night Before Christmas. And he was wanting to get Christmas back then in America was people going from house to house demanding food. Otherwise, we'll do something to destroy your house. We'll do something to it. And that's the same thing as trick or treat, but they did it at Christmas. And when he writes he's trying to paint St. Nicholas as a good guy. So he puts into the night before Christmas, there's nothing to dread. How's the line go? Y'all know how the line goes the night before Christmas. All through the house, not a creature stirring, even in the house. Put his finger beside his nose. Huh? That there was nothing to dread. There's a line in there, there's nothing to dread. The reason the line is in there, nothing to dread, was because he's trying to turn this Christmas thing around to make it a commercial thing for his business system in Manhattan. And that's why he wrote it. It's all about money. But you got to really read the Battle for Christmas. And then he shows how that they turned St. Nicholas by changing his dress and by employing these different cartoonists like Thomas Nast to draw pictures of him. And originally St. Nicholas had this long pipe. Well, he said the aristocrats smoked the long pipes. Poor people smoked short pipes because they could work with them and they just break the ends off, smoke the short pipes. Well, St. Nicholas originally had a long pipe, and they finally had him smoking the short pipe. They were trying to identify him with the peasantry, but they're trying to paint him up acceptable so there's nothing to dread. And that's the whole idea of bringing... This thing has been... People talk about schemes and men behind the scene that are trying to trick the American public, and this is what a lot of this is about. Of course, he is a Jew, Nissenbaum. He's not afraid to say it, see. But he is a professor. And the information is just tremendous. And it'll tell you, that's a picture of St. Nicholas in the mid-1800s on the front of it. It's not a jolly old elf. I believe there's a scheme behind the Coca-Cola presentation to make this jolly... He was an elf with 8 tiny reindeer. They were little bitty when he started off. Of course, that's all ridiculous, to get to all the world with a great big group of reindeer, with a reindeer that are 15 feet tall. That's ridiculous. But that's St. Nicholas in the mid-1800s, and that's not something that's acceptable. But he's got a little short pipe there. He doesn't have the big, long aristocrat's pipe. So they wanted him to identify with the poor people, but to show there's nothing to dread so they can start generating capital income. Do y'all know how long we've been under a conspiracy for a long time? And it's all it is men want to make money. That's all it is. Well, let me go ahead with this. How much time do I have? I got to go into the back of this. He talk about the dancing. Dancing in the sky until the rising of Pleiades. But let me show you how I'm going to tie some of this to. I'm going to tie this to what Israel was doing. Let me go back here to the back of this. I don't even have time to get into all this. He's going into Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table, and when you get into that mystic attitude in England of the old world, and you get into their killing witches, the same time that one of the popes had commissioned the killing of witches, I can't remember his name. Same time, that's the time of the Inquisition started. And they were accusing the witches of heresy. The witches were Protestants. That's the Inquisition. Huh? Yeah. That's what the witches were Protestants. And then they got the scare going where they got to killing a bunch of them. But let me show you something here. Then I'm going to give you some scripture here. People say, you don't preach without scripture. I'll tell you, I don't know how to give you all this information. So come up and look at the books. All right. And I want you to turn over to Exodus 34. I've wrestled with this a long time. I've told you don't ever know where you're going to find answers. And I got to read in this Celtic book, Exodus 34. Now, Exodus 34. Now, when you're reading in Two Babylons and in some other books, I just happen to know where it is in the Two Babylons. when you're reading in the two Babylons, I'm just trying to give you some information about Halloween and where it comes from. Where's my... Oh, here it is. When you're reading the two Babylons, they'll tell you, you look up Druid in the back of your two Babylons book. Look up Druid, and it'll take you to a bunch of pages. It won't say Halloween. Whenever you're looking, if you look in, if you happen to be able to get the Golden Bough, you can get the one volume. You can look up Halloween in here, and he'll have stuff on Halloween and Samhain. Samhain is pronounced Samhain. He'll have both of them in here. But he only has Druid in here. But he'll tell you that, but you connect the Druids here with Halloween over there. It's the same thing. There's no difference. And he'll bring out in the two Babylons that the Druids would meet, or the Halloween people would meet on a strip of beach or somewhere in the woods, and they would start a fire, have a big fire, blazing bonfire. Oh, you want to know where the bats come from? They brought this out the other night on the Halloween special. There's so much information. The bats identified with it is because they would light these big bonfires or bale fires, and mosquitoes are attracted to the bale fires, and the bats would come in to take the mosquitoes out, looking for the mosquitoes. So they identified the bats with Halloween. Boy, they got a wild imagination, don't they? Well, the Druids would take a hat or a basket of some kind. They would take a bunch of pieces of oat cake, and they would blacken one of the oat cakes. And everybody would reach in the oat cake, reach in the basket, pull out a piece of oat cake, and the one that got the black one was blackballed. If you're going to blackball somebody from a lodge, if you put in a blackball, that means he's voted out. Well, the one that got the black piece of oat cake, they had to jump through the fire. And that has a particular meaning. And Israel was passing their children through the fire constantly, weren't they? That's how Druid is connected with Israel. Israel was constantly passing their children through the fire. Well, let me read this paragraph here. An ingenious theory was invented after the introduction of Christianity with the purpose of allowing such ancient rites to continue with a changed meaning. They want to change the meaning so they'll be acceptable. Like I said, you can't change a pig into a kitty cat by bathing it and dressing it up and putting a new outfit on it. It ain't going to help. The passing of persons and cattle through flame or smoke was explained as a practice which interposed a magic protection between them and the powers of evil. So they weren't, when Israel was doing this, they were not trusting God, were they? This homeopathic device of using the evil power's own sacred fire as a means of protection against himself sometimes suggests, and I've looked in every commentary I have on this for years, and I never even mentioned this to y'all. This is one of those hooks I've had hanging out there. Suggests that seething of the kid in its mother's milk was reprobated by the Levitical law, but no doubt pagan demons were considered fair game. And what he's saying is to seethe a kid is to pass it through the fire. Now, look over here in Exodus 34. To seethe is to burn, and I suppose that means to pass it through the fire while it's suckling its mother, while it's of that age. I've never seen a commentary that had any idea what this meant. And I got bunches of commentaries. In Exodus 34:26, the first of the first fruits of thy land thou shalt bring unto the house of the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk. Now, I have read some commentaries where they would say the pagans evidently did this, and that's all I could ever get out of it. But this is like passing through the fire to get rid of the demons. Look at Deuteronomy 14.
What does that mean?
It means, they said if they ran an animal through the fire, or made it jump through the fire that was flaming, and you remember how these people, isn't it funny? You go to India and they walk through the fire, these fiery coals, and then these guys on motorcycles jump through fires, and they got it from somewhere. It's like the demons would go away when they passed an animal through the fire. But they were also passing their children through the fire. Israel was, wasn't it? Not only was Israel doing that, they were burning their children in the fire to Molech, passing them through the fire and burning them and eating them. And then you're back to cannibalism, Kahan Baal, and Baal meaning the fire god, and they ate from their altars, and he brings that out in this. But read here in Deuteronomy 14. I'm not saying anything, Mary. That's what they said. If they passed an animal through the fire, that would drive away the demons of the evil. Deuteronomy 14. I'm just giving you a lot of information. Maybe it'll stir you up to buy some of these books and learn some of this stuff. Deuteronomy 14, verse 21. Ye shall not eat of anything that dieth of itself. Thou shalt give it unto a stranger that is in thy gates, that he may eat it, or thou mayest sell it unto an alien, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. Thou shalt not seethe a kid in his mother's milk.
What does that mean?
It means, seethe means to burn. It means to put them in the fire while they are suckling at the mother, while they're of that age. Because that was a pagan understanding. It drove demons away. Ask me how they come up with that. Who knows? We might run across it one day if we keep studying enough. Now let me keep reading this to you. Let me read on. The explanation, of course, is an obviously and clumsily forced one. It was the grim Druidical philosophy that, to quote Caesar, unless the life of man was repaid, or for the life of man, the will of the immortal gods could not be appeased. That dictated both the national and private human sacrifices of the Celts, the shadows of which remain in the leaping through bonfires and the numerous recorded sacrifices of cattle within quite recent times. Now, look over here in 2 Kings, 21st chapter, 2 Kings. Let's just look at some of these. 2 Kings, 21st chapter. This enraged God. He didn't like this at all. Now this is where Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, one of the most righteous men who ever lived, Manasseh, his son, did more evil deeds than anyone who ever lived before him, any king of Israel. Yet he converted after he got older. But here's some of the things he did. He got involved in Christmas and Halloween is what he did. All right, Manasseh was 12 years old and began to reign. Let me skip on down here. I got too many of these to read for you. He built, verse 3, he built up again the high places. The high places is where they kept the tree goddesses outside the city, which Hezekiah his father had destroyed. And he reared up altars for Baal and made a grove, as did Ahab, king of Israel, and worshipped all the host of heaven and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord. He built altars for Baal in the grove in the house of the Lord. Sun and tree worship. The Lord said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. And he built altars for all the host of heaven in the two courts of the Lord. And he made his son pass through the fire. He got involved in Druid worship here. Oh, by the way, the Druids were alive and well here. They were all over the world at that time. So this was a common thing throughout the world. Made his son pass through the fire and observed chimes and used enchantments and dealt with the familiar spirits and wizards. He wrought much wickedness in the sight of the Lord to provoke God to anger. And he set a graven image of the grove of the Christmas tree that he had made in the house. If you'll notice, you can't separate the culture and the customs of Halloween and Christmas and Easter and Mardi Gras. You can't separate them. They're all the same thing. They're all just intermixed. Of which the Lord said to David and to Solomon his son and his house, in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of the cities of Israel, will I put my name forever. Huh? What did I say? Okay. Of all the tribes of Israel. Neither will I make the feet of Israel move any more out of the land which I gave their fathers, only if they will observe to do according to all I have commanded them, and according to all the law that my servant Moses commanded them. And they hearkened not, and Manasseh seduced them to do more evil than did the nations whom the Lord destroyed before the children of Israel. Manasseh did more evil than all the nations before, all the Amorites and Hittites, Perizzites, Hittites, all of them. And then God says, because of this, I'll turn Jerusalem upside down further in the chapter and wipe Jerusalem clean like a man wipes a plate, turning it upside down, that whosoever heareth it, both his ears shall tingle. Because he's passing his son through the fire and trusting in a God to drive away evil that's a dead God and that's not there. It's a Druidic God. This is how Halloween connects. You think God wants us to be doing something that's connected with that? Besides that, Colossians 2:8 says, beware lest any man spoil you, lead you away into captivity, through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of men and after the rudiments of this world and not after Christ. In Jeremiah 10:2, the Bible says, the customs of the people are vain. A custom is something you do over and over and over every year, every day, that is vain, it's hebel, it's worthless. People say, what's wrong with Christmas and Easter and Halloween? They're worthless. There's nothing profitable in it. It's crazy, isn't it? And look over, gosh, I got so many places to go here. Look at Jeremiah 19:5. I can't get to all these. I'm just trying to connect Halloween with the Bible. And people say, that's not what that's about. That's because you're stupid too. I ain't got time for somebody to even talk back after all this information. I ain't got no time for that. Don't come and call me and say, you're just making that just your opinion. That's the way you put it together. Yeah, and you're an idiot. I shouldn't use idiot. You're ignorant. Idiotes. Unlearned. I get so disgusted with the world that you can throw... The amount of facts I got on this platform would fry the brain of every preacher in the world, mine included. And they don't even want to address it. 19 chapter is one of my favorite verses. Israel's offering the blood of their innocents in the valley of Tophet. God says, I'll destroy you for that. And in 19, in verse 5. Well, back up to 2. And go forth into the valley of the son of Hinnom, which is by the entry of the east gate, that's just south of Jerusalem, and proclaim there the words that I shall tell thee. Tophet was down there southeast of Jerusalem. They offered their children in the fire to Baal. They ate their children. They were cannibals. Kahan Baal. Priests of Baal. Kahan is the word priest. Baal was the fire god. I didn't finish reading that. Gosh, wait a minute. I didn't even finish reading that. There's something over here and it's made me think of it. I can't even get to everything. No, that's not out of this one. It's out of another page. Out of this one. I'll get back to it. But the priests of Baal ate human sacrifices from their altars. The priests of Baal wore tall white pointed hats and white sheets and worshiped a flaming cross on Lady Day in the ancient world. The clan comes out of the same thing as the Druids and the same thing that Israel worshiped. It's all the same. Goodness. And that's why the swastika is on the clan's robes. And I'm not talking to you right here. I'm talking to that TV camera. I know y'all know that. All right. 19. One of my favorite chapters on Israel. And how that they went after... And this is Israel. This is not some pagans. This is Israel. Go forth into the valley of the son of Hinnom, which is by the entry of the east gate, and proclaim there the words that I shall tell thee, and say, hear ye the word of the Lord, O kings of Judah and inhabitants of Jerusalem. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will bring evil upon this place, the which whosoever heareth his ears shall tingle. He says the same words that he says in that 21st chapter of 2 Kings because of Manasseh's wickedness. He says these same words. Both his ears shall tingle because they have forsaken me and have estranged this place and have burned incense in it unto other gods whom neither they nor their fathers have known, nor the kings of Judah, and have filled this place with the blood of innocents. Nakias, the word means all the charges are dropped to the ground. These were innocent babies. Babies do not go to hell. They were offering their nursing infants. That's what Lamentation says. They were offering their nursing babies to Baal. And he says, I'm going to destroy this place. And look up there in verse 8. Because you've done all this, I will make this city desolate and in hissing. Everyone that passeth thereby shall be astonished and hiss because of all the plagues thereof. I will cause them to eat the flesh of their sons and the flesh of their daughters, and they shall eat every one the flesh of his friend and the siege and straightness wherewith their enemies and they that seek their lives shall straiten them. Then shall thou break the bottle in the sight of the men that go with thee. Man, I wish I had time to even go through all this. I'm just barely getting started. I feel like I'm just throwing a rock across the top of the water and skimming the surface. We really have to sit here for about 6 months for me to even get started on it, and we'll just all take a shower and come back in every few minutes and not leave. The amount of information is just phenomenal. Then, how much time do I have? I ain't got much time at all. I've got Israel passing their children through the fire. Look at 1 Kings 3:27. 2 Kings 3. 2 Kings 3. Now this is where the king of Moab is fighting Israel, and Jehoram is the king of Israel. And Elisha is traveling with Jehoram, and the king of Moab sees he's losing the battle. We went through this chapter right before I left the books of the Kings here several years ago. I was going to come back to it. But look, now you want to know why this man did this, and there's been so much in the air why he did this. Now we know a little bit about it. Verse 26, when the king of Moab saw that the battle was too sore for him, he took with him 700 men that drew swords to break through even unto the king of Edom, but they could not. And the king of Moab took his eldest son that should have reigned in his stead and offered him for a burnt offering upon the wall to drive away the evil. That was a Druidic custom. That was a Halloween custom. Fires were a major part of Halloween. On that wheel of the year, every one of those were fire festivals. All those 8 points were fire festivals. And when you go into one of the books in my new set of books on the Golden Bough, it says has one volume called Balder, just Balder, I believe it is. That's one of the fathers of the gods among the Druids. And you get in there and it starts off Halloween fires. It's got Halloween fires in a minute. And it's got midwinter fires. And it's got Easter fires. It's all about fires. Because the fire god was Baal. The fire god was Hercules. If you watch an old Saturday afternoon Steve Reeves movie when he was the Hercules of the 50s and 60s in movies and dubbing in the words, and Steve was a real good-looking, tall weightlifter, you know. I mean, talking like this, all right, dubbing in English into those Italian-made movies, you know. You know how they do that, like the Japanese movies. And they're calling him the child of the sun. And they'll march these guys out in these Roman movies, and Hercules will come on the scene. He's always called the sun god or the child of the sun, or some term that reckons him to be the child of the sun god upon the earth. Y'all seen some of that, haven't you? It's written in the movies. It's written into cheap movies. That's why I mentioned that. It's written into real D-grade movies. I mean, they do more research than Baptist preachers. Guy that makes a stinking movie does more research. The child of the sun. Gosh, I don't even know where to go. Where did I say where to go? Oh, look here in 2 Kings 16. 16. See if I can read some of them real fast. 16:3. I believe it's 16:3. Yeah. In the 17th year of Pekah, the son of Remaliah, Ahaz, the son of Jotham, king of Judah, began to reign. 20 years old was Ahaz when he began to reign, and reigned 16 years in Jerusalem, and he did not that which was right in the sight of the Lord his God, like David his father. But he walked in the way of the kings of Judah, yea, and made his son pass through the fire. What that's saying is we don't believe God. That's all it's saying, isn't it? Huh? It's just saying Ahaz, king of Judah, was making his son pass through the fire. That's a Druidic custom. That's a Halloween custom. That's what all the fires are about at Halloween, and bonfires, and your children are the dead, and they become the mass, and they're going from house to house demanding food. You really got to connect the trick-or-treat. It was actually a Christmas thing back 150 years ago in America. They'd go from house to house, and the first Christmas, it talks about this family, the first record of any Christmas in the 1700s, and these drunken guys come up to this house demanding food, and if you don't give it to us, we're going to mess up your house. Or I like what Garrison Keillor said. He was on that special the other night, and he said, after little kids throw a bunch, he said it's kind of difficult to get wet toilet paper out of a tall maple tree. He said, I had to reconsider my stand on capital punishment that night. I thought that was funny. Now where was I? This is Ahaz, king of Judah, making his son pass through the fire. When you make them pass through the fire, that's a Druidic thing. That's a Halloween thing. That's a Celtic thing. And they were doing it saying, I'll drive away evil spirits and drive away demons. In other words, they were saying, I deny Jehovah God. And God destroys Israel for this. And this is the same. It's the same system as Baal in the Grove, the same thing as Christmas. It all interweaves and twines together. You can't even get one away from the other. It's like this big meshwork of one system to the other. It's because Babylon mothered it all on self, let's make us a name. And when a man constructs his own religion, he can't keep it straightened out, can he? He's got all these many gods. And it ain't nothing but a man, because their gods, those little children that walk up to a house and knock on the door asking for candy, it's the same thing as Shintoism in Japan. It's ancestor worship, because they're playing the part of the ancestor being the dead god that's coming knocking on the door for food. And they wanted to tone down the image of it in the 1800s. And the business people worked on it for a long time before they actually got it into shape where they could make it a kid's holiday. You read the Battle for Christmas. Has anybody got that here? You read the thing through, you can't believe what you're reading. Because when Christmas was done by the heathens 150 years ago, it was nothing. They didn't put up a tree and stand around singing joy to the world. They went from house to house. Hey, give us some perry. That's pear wine. Give us some perry, or give us some booze, and if you don't, we'll burn your house down. Trick or treat. And that was Christmas. And the people were afraid and dreaded to see them coming. That's why the dead St. Nicholas, who is an ancient ancestor, comes, and now there's nothing to dread. They painted him different. They were trying to change. Then once they painted into a children's holiday, then they took it back from themselves. Now they have wild Christmas parties and wild... I know what kind of parties they had. The biggest party night of the year was New Year's night in the music business. And I tried to... And you'd book yourself a year ahead if you had a real good group, and I could get 4,000 or 5,000 for a night, and I didn't even have any hit records for my New Year's Eve. So you'd book it way ahead, and they would be there drunker than a bunch of skunks. Don't tell me what Christmas is about. I know as much about New Year's Eve as I know about nightclubs. It's the one time of the year that all the bands want to book themselves a year ahead in one of the biggest places they can book so they can get the biggest pay for the year. And it is a drunken brawl everywhere I've ever sung. And I've done a bunch of New Year's Eve parties. And I thought they were funny. I didn't get drunk with them. I just sat back. A bunch of clowns, you know. All big brass in the military. I've run out of time, and I'm just barely getting started on this. I got all kinds of verses on I wrote them down here, on Israel passing their children through the fire. That's Halloween. That's what it is. The Druids are alive and well back then. Yeah.
Could you use very spiritually today of passing their children through the fire?
Well, we're trying to protect ourselves from evil. I don't know if we are sacrificing our children on the altars, and that's what they were doing. And the altars are on every street, and they're called Williamsburgs and Colonials and ranch houses and Cadillacs and Mercedes, and we're putting in their children's eyes and ears, and we're killing them. Besides aborting them, we're offering up on these altars in America. If you want to look at some of my books, you can come up here and look at them. I can't even get started in this Celtic book. It's got so many Gaelic names in it. It's hard to even read them. These guys did some super research. Along with Mr. Hislop, along with the Golden Baal and the Sabbats. I was going to read some about Halloween here. Maybe I'll read some out of that Sunday morning. It's astounding where all this stuff comes from, and people say it's harmless. People getting killed at Halloween because of gangs running wild out here in the streets and trying to have fun, and people get killed at Halloween like they do at Christmas. And what we've done, we've glorified the dead. We've glorified dead ancestors, and most of our dead ancestors went to hell. They've got them going somewhere and coming back from the dead and being zombies, you know, or vampires, and it takes you back to demon worship, doesn't it? Because demons were ancestors. Remember that? They were female deity. They were female ancestors that they turned into gods that come and inhabited your body. The mishmash it's hard to even grasp. But this is the first time I've just come up here and just went, let me just lay out some stuff out here, just some information, and tie some Bible with it so you can see how this all goes together. Let's pray. Father, thank you for truth. Thank you for letting us see that what we need to do is to get a picture of this. Go to the Scriptures and to see how that you've shown us how Israel was involved in all of this. We've talked about Baal in the Grove so much. And Lord, you're letting us see how it's all the same as this Halloween thing, this Druid system. Thank you for your truth. I don't know who wants this except the elect. Lord, I pray you'll continue to open doors throughout America that we can get this message throughout the world, get this message out to the world. Lord, I'm willing to stand up and be persecuted for it. You've brought me to that point. I pray that you'll do the same for the elect here at the church, that you'll give these people a boldness that they've never had, and let them find strength in one another, because they need that strength, Lord. It's so difficult to live in this day and time with all that the world has to offer. Even to the believer, it's so difficult staying true sometimes. God, we continue to give you the praise and glory for all things. Lead us to your elect in Jesus' name, amen.